Welcome. The topic for this video is how to use the quantity on hand history file. Anytime that your quantity on hand is adjusted, whether it's done manually, through an update program, due to a purchase order, or to an invoice or a return, a file called quantity on hand history is updated, and you can review that information to see who made the changes, when they made them, and what those changes were. To get to that menu selection, I'm going to start by going into General Files, letter T, number 3, Inventory Tracking, and finally letter K, Quantity on Hand History File. I'm going to just show you what the report looks like first, and then I'll go through how to set the information up on the screen. If I were to hit Home and enter, which I just did, and bypass all of the criteria, it's going to show me every part in my inventory and what the adjustments were. So it starts with manufacturer and part number, the description of the part, and then a column called Action. Action is what happened to adjust the quantity on hand. So you'll notice that the first one that you'll see is POS-I, and the next one is POS-M. Those are tickets through point of sale. The I is my transaction code. I is an Isaac, which is an invoice. The transaction code M is a credit memo or a regular return. You'll see halfway down the page or a few lines down a POS-O. So you're going to see any kind of point of sale action is POS- and then the transaction code that was used for that particular line or that particular ticket, depending on how your transaction codes work in point of sale. There's an alter that's 4 lines down. An alter is when someone manually goes into the D3 screen or through a screen Y7N6 if you have multi-stores, and goes in and changes the quantity on hand just by F9 and altering that field. Some customers don't allow for that to occur, so you probably won't see an alter. You may see them from years ago, but you wouldn't see any current alters because they're requiring that you alter quantity on hand through a more legitimate menu selection where there's an audit trail. But anytime a quantity on hand is altered, you're going to see that here. Now the nice thing about this is if you look a couple columns over, you're going to see the clerk who was responsible for that. So if you have the screen set up to allow for alters through D3 and we ask for the clerk code on the way in, which that's a relatively new system change, but you can have it so that it requires a clerk code upon entering the inventory screens, then you'll know exactly who made that alteration. Why they did it is still unknown, but you can at least go and start doing some research there. You're going to see actions such as PORCV. That is a purchase order receive. So your quantity on hand would most of the time in those situations go up, and that's a received purchase order once it's received and updated into your inventory. You're going to see a couple of line items that say adjust, ADJST. So like I was mentioning, a number of our customers don't want their employees to go in and alter quantity on hand on the inventory record. They want to use the adjustment screens so that they can have paper trails if they want to figure out why the adjustments were made. If you see that ADJST menu selection, it means that someone made an adjustment either through the D6 menu screen or through the handhelds, through X5A. There are a number of other options for actions. If you make a change through D6 and you added a reason, there is a screen that will give you what the action was as the reason. It's going to be an exclamation point and then the code that represents that reason. So we have an entire list of what those actions are that we can provide for you so that you know exactly what the reason was for the change. The next column over is the date. You'll notice that mine are going backwards, so the most current change is at the top of the list, the time the change was made, and then a reference number if there was a ticket involved, a purchase order number if there was a PO involved, a clerk code if the clerk was required. You'll notice right at the bottom of the screen, we have a couple of alters where there was no clerk. Between that day was when we turned on that flag so that it shows or requires who your clerk is upon entry into D3. So you may have some blank spots in there. That's where the action didn't require a clerk code or a ticket number. The next column is my quantity. This is my quantity that was affected. So in the top line item, I had one item that was sold. The next line down, I had one item that was returned. A couple lines down, I had a quantity out on hand of 6 that was adjusted. So you'll notice that the next column is the quantity on hand before, and then the final column is the quantity on hand after. So when you go into these screens and you make adjustments, you obviously have the ability to add to or subtract from the current quantity if you want to do the math. We have other customers or other locations in the system where you might go in and say, I don't care what the current quantity on hand is, I'm doing my yearly count or my monthly count of these parts, I'm simply going to type in what the quantity on hand is. And you'll notice that the quantity field is the representation of the math, regardless of whether you typed in the quantity that you're going to end up with or you chose to have the computer do the calculation. To scroll through these reports, I have my F1 and F2 buttons. I have an F5 that will send me back to my report to allow me to choose a particular part. My F6 takes me to the very last page in this report, and then exit will kick me back out. So I'm going to hit my escape key and go back out to the menu, and now I'm going to show you how to use this. So I'm going to click on quantity on hand history. It's going to require me to enter my clerk code, and first it's going to ask me which store's quantity on hand I want to look at. Now, most of the time you would look at a single store's quantity on hand by just entering that store's ID right where my cursor is blinking. You can also choose multiple stores if you were to enter asterisks here. Notice my cursor goes to the next line, so the asterisks are saying look at all of my stores, and then I can filter the stores in this compare option area here. You can show all of your stores if you perhaps have 2 or 3 and you want to track the movements between each location. You're going to want to make sure that you are able to tell which store either sent material or received material. So if you have any questions on that, or if the screen looks a little confusing when you pick multiple stores, please call SBC and we can walk you through that. I'm going to go back here and just choose my store number 1. Okay, range. Do I want a range of parts? If I do, I can add it. Now, one thing you'll have noticed, actually let me back that up, that's a great example. I'm going to enter the bookend, hit my enter key, and I'm going to choose letter A, which is the bookend. It's going to give me a message, my bookend isn't found in quantity on hand history. We do not have a running list of every part in your inventory in the quantity on hand history file. We didn't want you to have to deal with removing those if you were running a report. We didn't want to have to deal with files being enormous and including large amounts of parts that have never been sold. The quantity on hand history file only gets updated when a part is sold or altered or the quantity on hand is touched. Most customers might have a record in there from the very first time that their system went live. It'll show you the quantity on hand that was imported through your conversion. But if you have parts in your inventory that had no quantity on hand upon conversion and that have never been sold or stocked, there's going to be no record. So don't be surprised if you come in looking for parts that you weren't sure about whether you sold and there is no record. So I'm going to say yes, I want to scan, and it's going to pull up the first Wix part that I have that actually has legitimate quantity on hand adjustments. I am going to grab a couple more of these. I can hit the F2 key or the F1 key to go back and forth, and again all it's going to show me are Wix parts where I have had adjustments. I'm going to go to a 51516. If I want to use my filters, I can do that as well. Instead of putting my parts here, I can enter, I want to look for history for my manufacturer of Wix. I can put it down here, manufacturer equals Wix. I can do things like put where manufacturer does not equal Wix, so I can use my compare options the same way I would use in any other report generator screens. In this case, I'm going to use part number WIX 1515 and 51516. I'm going to press my home key. From the top down, my report options. If I'm going to print this to my screen, then none of this matters, but I have the ability to change the date if I'd like to change the report, and then to run it in the background. Now, quantity on hand history, if you have a lot of search criteria or if you're running a huge line of parts, you may want to run this in your background just so it doesn't hold up your monitor here and allow you to continue with your work. I'm going to press the home key to return. My print options, do I want to print it to screen or do I want to print it to paper? Do I want a PDF file or do I want to email it to someone? You really would never use the none because there isn't much stuffing that happens in this particular file. I wouldn't suggest it if you're thinking about it. So I'm going to choose screen, but you do have the option to print this to paper if you'd like. And then do you want to show this in descending order or ascending order? Now, it depends on when your system was started. If your system was started back in 2002, please do not choose ascending order because it's going to start with all of the quantity on hand adjustments that were made back in 2002. So either specify your date range in your criteria or simply use descending order, and that will show you the most current items first. I'm going to click on the home key to return. My selection is the same screen I saw before. And then updating. Do I want to remove selected entries? This is up to you. We have some customers who really like to clean up their system, so they want to remove selected entries that are older than perhaps 2 years old. Is there a need for quantity on hand history data that's older than a year old or 2 years old? That's a decision that you would want to make. We have some customers who set up jobs in their end of month or end of year that come in and remove entries. Now, the nice thing about removing entries is that the less entries that you have in the quantity on hand history file, the faster it is to run any report that you'd like. So if you do have items back from 2002, like I mentioned before, unless you have a reason to keep track of that information, there's no reason for you to keep it in the system. We can run it to a file so you have it just in case, and then we can remove any of those items so your searches don't take nearly as long. So this is up to you, but this is how you would go in and remove those entries if you wanted to. I'm going to press the home key, and I'm going to hit the enter key, and remember I chose just those two parts, so it's going to pull this up. Now notice that my action on my 51515 part is an exclamation point and an A. My A is in my reason for adjustment file, so I can go back to my reason for adjustment table and I can determine what that A actually stands for. So that is an option for you to set up reasons for why these changes were made. Notice that my date is next, time, my clerk or my reference number, my quantity on hand of the adjustment, quantity on hand before, quantity on hand after. You'll notice that my WIX 51516 oil filter, one of my actions or one of the first actions is an ICTAJ. That is an adjustment that was made through my inventory counting screen. There's another one that's CYCAJ, and that's a change that was made through my cycle counting adjustment screen. So if you want to filter your report by date and perhaps by action, and you can say, I just want to look for any of the changes that were made when we counted inventory using the DA menus or DD menus, you can do so by determining where the action is whatever your required action is in the list. And as I said, that list can be provided to you if you'd like to see it. I'm going to click on the Help button in the lower right, and anywhere my cursor is sitting, it allows me to, or it gives me a help line of information as to what I can do when my cursor is at that particular area. So this is saying that I can look at one of those tickets if I want to by putting my cursor up into the screen and looking at those particular reference numbers. So this report, as I said, is typically run to paper or run to a file on a daily or monthly basis. If you're going to review it like that, most people like to review this on a timely basis they're having an issue with quantity on hand. They're trying to figure out whether there's some theft involved or whether people are just counting their shelves wrong, so they pull this up on an as-needed basis. If you have any questions on how any of this works, please call SBC at 800-829-4722 or send us an email at sbctraining@autolog.com. Thank you so much.